Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted that you're able to join us this morning for this very special webinar hosted by members of the European Network for Academic Integrity. I'm delighted to introduce two researchers who are very experienced in the area of academic integrity, Dr. Tomas Foltynek and Dr. Irene Glendinning, joining us from Mendel University in the Czech Republic and Coventry University in the UK. We're looking forward to hearing their insights from their latest project looking at the academic integrity landscape. To begin with, we're going to hear from Irene, who will be presenting findings from her latest research project conducted under the Council of Europe's Ethics, Transparency and Integrity in Education platform, ETINED, which considers approaches to academic integrity observed in the countries of Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Kazakhstan and Turkey. Tomas will follow, introducing the work of the European Network for Academic Integrity, a consortium of 12 partner institutions led by Tomas. If you'd like to ask questions while our presenters are speaking, please add those via the Q&A button, which is in the bottom center of the webinar window. Irene and Tomas will look at the questions once they've finished presenting in the final stages of the webinar. So I'd like to begin by handing over to Irene, who's going to share her slides with you.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Great to have you all on board. I'm going to start by talking about this project, which was actually a project led by myself from Coventry University and by Tomas from University of Mendel in Brno. So let's go on. There we are. Yeah, I've managed to move to the next slide. So the project itself, we call PAICKT. It was commissioned and funded by the Council of Europe's ETINED platform. And as I said just then, the two universities involved, there was a team from Mendel University in Brno and myself and a team from Coventry University in the UK. And we started it in the autumn last year, and we've just recently finished it. There is a link on the slide there to the project website. The project report isn't out yet, but it will be out probably in the spring. So we're just finishing off just doing the final touches to the report now. So I hope you'll enjoy what we have to present. Clearly, in the time we have, we can't present everything. So I've just selected a few key issues from the findings. I'm going to start by, excuse me, I've got to work out how to change slides. Yeah, okay, successful. So the objectives of the project then were to identify and analyse policies and practices in these 5 countries. And it's the third project in a series of projects we've been doing, which I'll explain to in a minute. We were looking for gaps and challenges, good practice examples, particularly to do with academic integrity and with ethical practices, and to present some guidelines for promoting capacity building in higher educations in these 5 countries. So the teams, the names of all the people involved in the project are on that slide, and I've got to particularly thank Dita, my colleague from Mendel University, for preparing the slides that she presented last week in Prague. I have actually shortened the presentation considerably and changed it a little bit, but I'm very grateful to all the nice designs on the slides that she created. I don't have time to do pretty things like that with slides. I'm very, very grateful for Dita for doing that. And also, we acknowledge everybody involved in the project. Although I'm presenting it, I'm actually representing all my colleagues here from the UK and from Czech Republic. We worked together on several projects before. So the first project we did started back in 2010, and that was the IFI project. And that surveyed 27 European Union countries, and the link to it is there if you wanted to follow up on that later. That was followed up by, so that was an Erasmus project, and that finished in 2013. So from that project, we had results for the 27 European Union countries. The only European Union country that wasn't included in that was Croatia, because they actually joined the EU in July 2013, so they were just at the end of the project there. The next project we did was the CPAICKT project, so we actually surveyed 6 countries in southeastern Europe, and those were the former Yugoslavian countries and Albania, so that did include Croatia. And because we use the same methodology on all the different projects, we updated it slightly, we're able to compare the results across the different projects. Although the initial results, the 27 European Union results, are actually getting rather out of date now. So it would be nice to start all over again and do it all again, but that would be a very big job and require quite a lot more funding to do that. This time, the main difference we had, or we updated and I'll talk a little bit about the methodology, we updated some of the questions we asked. But the other major difference was we employed a country manager in each of the 5 countries. So we're very grateful to all of those 5 people who helped us with documentary sources, background information. They helped us to do some of the translations, although the main translation was done by the Council of Europe. But they helped to disseminate the information about the survey that we did, and they helped to organise visits, and they provided very useful feedback on the final report that we're just now completing. So very grateful to all those people. And while I've got that slide on, I have to say, those of you who have signed up, who are listening now, I know some of you actually took part in the survey. So we're really grateful to anyone, whether they're listening or not, who took part in the survey, whether they were involved in interviews or whether they actually did the online questionnaire, because without that information we wouldn't have any results. So we're very grateful to everyone who helped with the survey. So the survey participants were for kind of 4 categories really. We were particularly keen to get information from higher education students, from senior management of higher education, also teaching staff, academic staff, professors and so on, and people involved in policy making either at national or institutional level. And the way that we collected the data, we had a review of national policies and documentation at the beginning, and then we had online questionnaires in each of the local languages. We also had an English version of each of the different questionnaires. So we had separate questionnaires for students, teachers and managers, all higher education level. And then we actually visited each of the 5 countries, and while we were there, we conducted focus groups with students. We had interviews and discussions with teachers, interviews and discussions with managers in higher education institutions, and with other people involved in higher education within those 5 countries. So we had a pretty comprehensive set of information for each of those 5 countries, and we were very fortunate and it's very useful that we collected considerable amounts of data from each of those 5 countries. I haven't got the actual figures there on these slides, but I think it was something like 1,266, I think was the figure that's in my head, the number of responses that we got from the online survey, plus all the data that we got during the visits, which was all qualitative data, very interesting stuff. We also, in the 3 different surveys that we've done, we've used something called the Academic Integrity Maturity Model that was created for the IFI project. And that takes you'll see the results of that for each of the countries, and we've also compared it to the previous countries surveyed. So we now have 38 countries surveyed. And that is based on 9 categories of information. So we took the data from the online questionnaires, but we also took the qualitative data and used that to influence the scores for each country. So there were 9 categories: transparency policies, sanctions, software prevention, communication, knowledge, training and research. So those were all the different things that we were looking for evidence of within each of the countries. So the maximum score for each country is 36, and there is a link to some information about the AIM model. So here are the 38 country results. And Dita very kindly highlighted the 5 countries that we've recently surveyed in this latest project. And you'll see that Georgia and Kazakhstan have actually come fairly near the top of the scale when we rank the different countries there. Armenia is a bit lower down, and you'll see some more detail on each of the countries in a second. And one of the reasons why we think they are so high is, first of all, there's been a lot of initiatives in those countries, as you'll see, on academic integrity that has made a difference compared to surveys that we've done previously in different countries. But also the data for the original 27 countries is now a little bit dated, and I think some of those countries would score quite a lot higher now if we were to do the survey again. So if you look at the vertical scale on here, the actual maximum score is 36, and it's actually cut off there at 25. So the UK scored the highest way back in 2013 with 24 point something. But countries we know have made a lot of progress on academic integrity since we did the first survey. Plus the fact we were actually asking slightly different, more detailed questions. So we're asking questions about different things. Although we used the same core questions so we could compare them, there were some slight differences in the way that they were analysed. So that would account for some of the differences, and the fact that these countries scored quite a lot higher than some other countries. But nevertheless, we mustn't deny the fact that there has been a lot of work on academic integrity in some of these countries, and that has actually increased their score tremendously. So here are the actual scores for the 5 countries. So Armenia on the left, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Kazakhstan and Turkey. And as you see, Armenia scores quite a bit lower. And the 2 of the categories where they score particularly low are in the use of software, and also in the fact that there hasn't been a huge amount of research compared to the other countries in Armenia, and you'll see that in a different graphic in a minute. And Georgia is scoring the highest, and it scores a reasonably high score on every one of those 9 metrics. So the other way that we depict the academic integrity maturity model, the AIM, is to use these radar charts. And this actually shows quite graphically that the weaknesses in Armenia are the fact that there hasn't been a lot of research on a national and local level in Armenia. And also not a lot of Armenian institutions use software for helping to detect plagiarism and for other purposes, and sort of use of IT. So that would actually improve their score quite a lot. One of the other issues where all of the countries are quite low is on the kind of prevention side. So there's a lot of focus on perhaps penalties and sanctions, and less on the prevention side. But we did find quite a lot of good practice. So there's a lot of research in some countries. So for example, Kazakhstan was reasonably high on research, Turkey was as well. A lot of countries do training as well. So you see the training is actually quite high scoring on there as well. So I'm going to start off by looking at the good practice that we found, and I've just had to, because we've limited on time, I've just focused in on a few points of good practice, and then we look at the recommendations. And again, I'm looking at the general recommendations rather than very specific ones. So on the good practice, 2 for just Armenia, they have a system of what they call attestation. So every 5 years, the professors, the academic staff, have to have training, and are, depending on the outcome of that training, they are either reappointed to their roles or they lose their positions. And one of the things although that's good practice in its own right, we thought what would be quite useful is if they could include in that obligatory training some updates on academic integrity. So that's one of the recommendations that we've made. But the training itself we thought was good practice. I don't have any information. I've just been on holiday for 2 weeks in the Far East, so I'm feeling a bit jet lagged. So if you hear a loud snoring, you know, I've just fallen off to sleep. But while I've been away, we've just discovered there's been a new law dealing with contract cheating. And I don't have any details of that, but I will find out later on. And that is just applying to Armenia. So that we have as good practice. There are lots of international projects in most of the countries that have been influencing ethical practice, academic integrity policies, and different aspects that are really relevant to this project. And that has reflected in the scores that we've seen on the AIM metrics. So that is to be, for every country, to be congratulated on the work that's going on there. I'm going to single out on the next slide a particular one of those initiatives. Quite a few institutions have established centres for academic writing or academic quality assurance or academic integrity, which is very good. And again, that's reflected on the scores of those countries, which is why they're showing so high in the rankings there. All 4 of the 5 countries are using the text matching software. Unfortunately, it's not all good, because the interpretation of text matching software in most of the countries and most of the institutions has been a plagiarism detection software, and people are using the scores, the percentage scores, as a way of determining what the penalties should be, which is not good practice. So it's good and bad. So what we're saying is the use of text matching software is good, but there needs to be more training and more awareness on what the limitations of the software are and what the strengths are. And if the software was used for more formative learning purposes, then that would be much more positive, and the score would come out higher for each of those countries if that was happening. But nevertheless, the use of software is good practice in itself, but there needs to be much more maturity in the way that is used. Some of the institutions, some of the countries are introducing codes of ethics. Either they're introduced and they're being used, or they're being worked on at the moment. So that's good practice. And there is considerable evidence of development of policies for academic integrity, but that's really where there needs to be much more focus on consistency and transparency in that field. The one very strong example I want to talk about is in Kazakhstan. They have developed an academic integrity league, which was established last year, 2018. We understand there are currently 11 institutional members of that league, and there are 16 institutions waiting to join as candidate members. And what the league is doing is sharing good practice between all the members of the league, and they're binding themselves to certain standards for academic integrity, including sharing their data on their cases that they're finding, on the violations, but also on the good practices that they're having as well. It's a pity that not more institutions within Kazakhstan are joining that, but certainly as an example of good practice for others to learn from, I think the Academic Integrity League is certainly to be commended and to be looked at by other countries, and not just within this project, but other countries across the world, and perhaps to learn from that scheme. So I'm now going to have a look at some of the results, and those of you who've seen the earlier research will know that this is one of our favourite questions on the online questionnaire. We actually provided some, all the surveys that we've done, all the 3 projects we've done in the past, we've provided 6 scenarios, and we're asked students and also academic teachers what their opinions were as to whether these were plagiarism or not, and if so, whether they thought the punishment was relevant. And we use this really as a benchmark to see how much people understand what plagiarism is. So we're actually going to compare the students' responses from the online questionnaire to 2 of those scenarios. The first one is where we've got word-for-word plagiarism. 40% of the students' work, a piece of work, has been copied word for word with no changes. And Dita has very kindly provided an example of what that means there. So just chunks of copied data there on the left. So that was scenario A. Now scenario D was the same as scenario. It's still 40% of the student work was copied. But in this case, a few words were changed. So this typically a student will use you substitute words, as can be seen on the right there. So it's the same piece of text that's been copied, but just the odd word has been changed. And we all, I think most of us will realise that that is just as serious as the first instance. But the responses that we get from both students and also from some academic staff as well does differ. So these were the responses to the two. So this is a response to scenario A. And as you see, almost everyone in fact, everyone in Armenia, all the students, thought it was either serious plagiarism or plagiarism. But in the other countries, there was some doubt. So the orange and the red, the orange is not sure, and the red is, I don't think this is plagiarism at all. So even where 40% of the students' work was copied word for word with absolutely no quotations or any kind of referencing acknowledgement, there are still some people think that's not plagiarism. But when there are a few words changed, you can see that the responses change considerably. So within every country, these are students are either not sure about this or they think it's not plagiarism. So there is a much less certainty with this one. So this tells us that although students might think they understand what plagiarism is, there are considerable numbers of them who that have some misapprehensions or misunderstandings of what plagiarism might be. So this slide here is responses from teachers, and these are typical punishments that or sanctions or penalties, whatever you want to call them, that people say, the teachers say are given out. So no action will be taken is the first one, and you'll see that quite a few of the respondents, up to about 35% in Turkey, for example, say no action would be taken for plagiarism. But some of the respondents had different responses. So typically a verbal warning or required to rewrite it. And one of the reasons we're interested in this question is because if there isn't any penalty for these actions, then we're not going to see students taking these things very seriously. Now this is an interesting one. So this is comparing responses of managers and teachers to the question, who decides on the penalty applied to students? And in this particular example, it's for exam cheating, but we also ask questions on other ones as well. And you can see there are considerable differences between the manager's responses and the teacher's responses, in that there are more people thought individual teachers or supervisors make the decision on exam cheating than the managers. So there is clearly a kind of communication difference there, or there's a difference in what actually happens on the ground compared to what the managers think happens. So that's quite an interesting response, and lots more data on that as well that I've not got time to show you here. So here are some responses about students receiving training. Because if students don't have training on avoidance, on how to write academically and how to avoid plagiarism, then it's not surprising that they're not making any steps there. So you'll see in Armenia there's quite a low percentage of people, certainly of managers, think training happens. The teachers are, in Armenia, think almost 50% of the teachers think training happens, and slightly less of the students think training happens. And if we go over to Turkey now, the managers, nearly 90% of the managers think training is happening. Almost 60% of the teachers, but less than 30% of the students think that training is happening. So there's a very great difference there between different stakeholders within higher education as to what's going on. So one of the recommendations from the research is that much more training is needed, not just for students, but for everybody. I'm running short of time now, so I'm going to have to go a little bit faster. There's much more I could say. So this is a slide about what leads students to plagiarise, and this is slight differences in different countries. And these are typical of the kinds of responses that we've been having everywhere else. So this is choosing from a list of potential reasons for plagiarism. And there are things that we've seen everywhere else. So I won't dwell too much on that slide. So here's some recommendations, which I'll have to go through fairly fast because I'm running out of time. And these are general recommendations, although we did have recommendations for each country as well. So openness, and there should be more opportunities for sharing of ideas, much more transparency, consistency when dealing with academic misconduct, and that's really needed for fairness and transparency and so on. We believe the institutions should be maintaining statistics on cases of academic misconduct and different cases of them, different types. Not necessarily sharing them across on a national level, because institutions will have different ways of maintaining them and recording them. But certainly inside an institution, if you're not keeping statistics and you're not keeping records of cases, you can't pick up on repeat offences. And in some cases, the final point there isn't a national language corpus of academic sources, although some countries are beginning to develop those. Unless you have that, you've got no way of software being able to find those sources. For deterring academic misconduct and also for deterring corruption, lots more training and use of software and what the software can be, how the software can be used to maximum benefit. There should be access to software tools for every institution. No, I know it's expensive, but it should be there, but effective software tools. In terms of conflicts of interest are interesting, because people don't see, in many of these countries, people don't see the conflicts of interest as being problematic. But actually, unless you declare conflicts of interest, unless you're aware of it, that can lead to all sorts of opportunities for corruption. We'd like leaders to set an example. That's leaders within institutions, but also leaders generally in society. Where corruption is found, it should be challenged and sanctions should be applied. And we would like to see academic integrity being taught earlier in education, because there is certainly evidence that the problems start much earlier than higher education. I'm going to stop there and just thank my colleagues for all the work they've put in. And I think at this stage we may have some time for some questions. There's some references there at the end. And I think I'll be passing over now to Jill.
Yeah, we had a couple of questions came in while you were talking, Irene. One question was asking if it would be possible to see and share the original survey, that it might be possible to be adapted and used in other areas, if that was possible.
Yes, I don't think there's any problem with that. We have shared it with lots of people in the past, and it has been translated into different languages. So yes, we've got no problem with that. If people contact us individually, we're very happy to share. There are 3 surveys up for the different levels of, but yes, we're happy to share the surveys. But also, as Thomas will tell you, we have some self-evaluation surveys within the NI project. So I'll leave that for Thomas to explain in a minute. So those are already available.
Great. And there was one other question, I think, which related to that last slide that you put up there, asking just to explain what you mean by conflict of interests.
Yes, okay. So if I'll give an example. If someone has a family friend who they have been asked to intervene and help in terms of influencing an exam mark or influencing, then in some countries it's seen as disloyal not to help that person. Mm-hmm. So we had an example of a manager of a vice dean, I think it was, within an institution, who was asked by someone, a family friend or a relative, to make sure the student passed an exam. And that was seen as a perfectly normal thing to do. and that kind of conflict of interest should be declared and removed, and to make sure that person doesn't have that opportunity to influence those kind of results, because that's unfair to other students.
And there was one other question that's just come in about the sanctions for plagiarism issues.
Yes.
Students, which you touched on in the slide there, but I guess there is more information in the full report about the full range of possible sanctions that are used.
Yes, there is more information in there. There's a whole range of different sanctions. I didn't prepare that slide, so that was selected from the most common ones that were chosen. But there are other sanctions that were within that question. So there is more information on that within the report.
Lovely. Okay, so if there are no more questions for now, we can take some more at the end of the session if we have time. Oh, there was one more just asking when you're expecting the research to be published.
Probably in the spring, because the report has just gone to the Council of Europe, and they will do all the typesetting, and then it will be published. It's up to them really. It depends how many errors they find and how many corrections they want us to do. Last time there weren't any, but this time there might be a few. So it's up to them really, but it should be in the spring. But we'll make sure people find out when it comes out.
Okay, we have one further question, but I think we'll take that right at the end, because I'd like to move on to Tomas now to give us more information about the NI and the work that they do, how it was set up, and also some of the great resources that they provide that Irene's already alluded to. I'll hand over to Tomas now.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. Thanks, Irene, for the presentation of the PAICKT project. Let me just add a couple of more pieces of information to the questions which Irene kindly answered. The survey tools are already available from the project webpage, and also the survey tools which we used in our previous projects are available. If you go to plagiarism.cz, so there are links to the PAICKT project and the previous ones, IFI project and CPAI projects, and all the survey tools are there, both in local languages and in English. And of course, as Irene said, we are more than happy if anyone uses these tools and adapt them to their local needs. In terms of conflict of interest and explanation of this term, let me now refer to the glossary of terms of the European Network for Academic Integrity. I will talk about it a little bit more in detail later, but if anyone is unsure with what some term related to academic integrity means, we have provided as a resource we have the glossary of terms, so the explanation can be found there. Just go to academicintegrity.eu and you will find it there. And the same applies to the question about sanctions. One of the resources of the European Network for Academic Integrity is the guidelines how to deal with different issues related to academic integrity. So there are several pages about possible sanctions and how to distinguish serious cases and cases which are caused by lack of knowledge, and what sanctions could apply in these cases. So now let's move to the topic of my presentation, European Network for Academic Integrity. So what was the reason why we established European Network for Academic Integrity? As Irene said, we have conducted before several projects related to academic integrity, and we found huge differences not only among countries but also among institutions in these countries. Many institutions lack of training for both teachers and researchers. In many institutions, management is convinced about some procedures and about the processes which they think work in their institutions, but if you ask teachers and students, you find actually the opposite. And in many institutions, there was lack of guidelines and fair approach. We also identified will to learn from each other, cooperate, and share good practice. So, as Irene already showed you, the differences in understanding of plagiarism among particular countries which we researched this time, the similar differences can be found also among the European countries. You can see that if the scenario of plagiarism is slightly changed, some words are changed, then there are many people who think that this is actually not plagiarism. And there are differences among countries. Here are the cases from the opposite sides of our spectrum, UK and Bulgaria, and you can see the challenges and gaps in some countries. We took an inspiration, which I have to acknowledge not to be accused from plagiarism. So the idea of establishing a consortium or a network of universities was not new. We took an inspiration from International Center for Academic Integrity, which already worked mostly in North America. It has only 4 European members before 2017. And European institutions didn't seem very keen to joining what was perceived as an American organization. So we decided to establish our own network, I mean European network for academic integrity. And the mission of NI, which stands for European Network for Academic Integrity, is to support higher education institutions to work together in the field of academic integrity. What we really can do is to provide support. We don't want to dictate what European universities should do. This is where our approach differs from what Irene talked about in her presentation, the Academic Integrity League in Kazakhstan. In Kazakhstan, they have strict criteria and they require meeting these criteria before institutions join their league. We don't have any such requirements. We are here to provide a platform which supports institutions to develop their own procedures and to develop their own policies. What we can do, we can provide opportunities where people can learn from each other's good practice and share experience. So the objectives of European Network for Academic Integrity is, as I said, to provide a platform, offer opportunities for researchers and practitioners, share best practices. We are organizing conferences, workshops, and other events. So overall, it's a collaborative network of people who are interested in academic integrity, have some positions in their institutions which is related to academic integrity, and they are developing materials together and learn from each other. The initial materials which we created were created within the project funded by the European Union, Erasmus Plus Strategic Partnership Projects. This was a 3-year project which finishes this August. Right now we have submitted the final report and are waiting for approval. And this project had 3 intellectual outputs. We developed educational materials, we developed toolkit for cross-sector cooperation, and we developed a toolkit for managers for improvements in academic integrity. So the first output is the database of materials where students and teachers can find more than 200 materials in more than 10 languages, which they can use directly in the classroom for education in classroom or for self-education for students and teachers. Toolkit for cross-sectoral cooperation consists mainly of a set of relevant real-life examples which show a link between academic integrity and professional integrity. And this might be used for discussions with students and and for teachers to show that the ethical issues which they deal with during their classrooms are related to the ethical issues which later on will apply to students' future professional career. The third output consists the tools which I already mentioned, the glossary of terms and general guidelines for academic integrity. So glossary of terms contains an explanation of some 200 terms related to academic integrity. Then we elaborate more on these terms in general guidelines, which is a material focused on management of higher education institutions, and they can take inspiration while designing relevant policies. And the last but not the least part of this handbook is a set of self-evaluation tools, which are online tools, or online tests, or online quizzes, if you want, where students, teachers, researchers, and managers can get feedback about their knowledge, attitudes, opinions, and processes related to academic integrity in their studies, teaching, research, or institutional policies. Besides the web page where all these materials are provided, we organize a lot of activities. So we organize annual conferences. Every year there is a conference of the European Network for Academic Integrity. This year it was in Vilnius in Lithuania. Next year it happens in Dubai, in United Arab Emirates. In 2021 it will be in Vienna. Last year, we started several new activities. We started to appreciate individuals' efforts towards academic integrity by offering awards. The very first person who received the NI award was Emilia Serkan from Romania, who is doing a great job in revealing cases of plagiarism, making them public, and raising awareness about this issue to raise the culture of academic integrity, or improve culture of academic integrity in Romania. We also are almost finished with the testing of support tools for plagiarism detection, and we expect the results to be published at the very beginning of the next year in January. And we established a working group for surveys, which is dealing with academic integrity research to ensure comparability. We also established ethical advisory group, which can provide an advice for member institutions. This year, we started supporting victims of plagiarism, which was motivated by several emails which we received at our email address. We also started to deal with integrity in academic publishing, and we plan to create more resources on this topic. And we want also make teaching of academic integrity more enjoyable for students, so we established a working group about gamification. European Network for Academic Integrity is a legal entity which is governed by board, which has 5 members, and the legal representative is the president of the board. Any legal entity engaged in educational activities can become a member of European Network for Academic Integrity. There are some fees which applies to institutional members and to individual supporters, which helps us to cover the administrative costs and improve the web page, improve the database of materials, and circulate a regular newsletter. The member institutions have certain benefits from their membership. They become part of the collaborative network with all of the opportunities for application for follow-up projects related to academic integrity. And of course, they can elect the board and influence the network, can become members of the working group, and participate on NI activities. So what we already have a legal body and association of 28 member institutions. So besides those 12 founding members who were partners of the project, we have now 16 more member institutions who already benefit from our membership. We have a well-established traditional conference, which happens every year. We have web page with resources, and we have links to the bodies and associations which have related interests, like International Center for Academic Integrity, Asia Pacific Forum for Educational Integrity, the ETINET platform of the Council of Europe, and European Network of Research Integrity Offices. And what is most important, we have a group of enthusiastic people who like working in the field of academic integrity, who like to share their resources and work collaboratively, so everyone can benefit from the outputs of their work. I would like to take this opportunity to invite you to the upcoming events. As I said, the next year, our conference will happen in Dubai in April. So if you go to the academicintegrity.eu webpage, there is a link to conference and you can register. Sometimes either in autumn next year or in spring 2021, there will be joint staff training event in Budapest in Hungary. And in autumn 2021, there will be a next annual conference in Vienna. This is the most important slide of my presentation, links to resources which we have. So as I said, we have the database of educational materials. All the materials are open access. Anyone is free to use. So we invite everybody to use these materials, translate them to their languages, adapt them to the needs of their institution, and possibly provide us with feedback so we can further work on the improvements. Subset of these materials are real-life examples on academic integrity. Then there is a glossary of terms related to academic integrity, general guidelines, and self-evaluation tools. So that's all from my side. If you want to learn more details about academic integrity, you can follow us on Facebook or Twitter, or subscribe to our regular newsletter, which we circulate approximately every other month. So now it's the one is going to be circulated in the middle of December. Thank you very much for your attention, and we are looking forward to meeting you at one of our events.
Thank you, Tomas. That's a great overview of the work that you're doing through the European network. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of questions that came in while you were talking. The first one was relating to the surveys, and given that librarians often have a key role in working with students and teaching staff on academic integrity, would you be open to maybe surveying librarians in future and including them in the results? That's maybe one for Irene.
Well, I have actually answered this one online, but I'll tell you what, I think it's a really great idea. The focus of the survey has been policies. So we're really looking at people involved in developing policies and using the policies. But we hadn't thought of surveying librarians, and nobody's mentioned it to us before. Well, one of the things we have done, though, when we've been traveling around in different countries, we do often have audiences of librarians, and that certainly happened in the NI project as well. We quite often, when we run events, we quite often have librarians in the audience then. So I think that's a great idea. We haven't done it before, but there's no reason why not in the future. What do you think, Thomas?
Yeah, if I just may add, there was actually a workshop which happened before the conference in Vilnius. It was focused on librarians. There were our colleagues from University of Constance in Germany who provided some training for librarians. And our Lithuanian colleagues did some survey among the participants and are going to share the results at the next conference. So we already we as an NI already started doing a little bit. It happens only in one country, but of course we are open to extend this activity to other countries as well, and we are open to collaboration in this field.
Okay, a couple of other questions on the surveys. Obviously, the surveys for this particular project are now closed, but Irene and Tomas would be happy to share those surveys with anyone who is interested in using them at their institutions. And a question about whether the surveys cover both private and public institutions. I'm guessing that they do, or?
Yes, one of the things about the institutions involved in the research, it's voluntary. So we try to, and certainly this time we've used the country managers as well, have tried to contact all the institutions within the country, and not everyone was interested in taking part in the survey, but where possible we do try to cover both private and public.
Sure. And one other question, it seems that someone is very keen for Russia to get involved in the surveys. Maybe that can be the next project.
The countries are decided by the Council of Europe, but Russia is definitely very high on the list of countries to survey next. I think they would like us to do that. And we'd be very happy to hear from anyone from Russia who would like to get involved, because it will happen. It may be the next project, it may be the one after, but certainly Russia is on the list.
Okay. And one question, maybe specifically for Tomas, this one about collaborating with universities in South Africa.
Well, we are European Network for Academic Integrity. As I said, it was a reaction to the fact that European universities were not really keen in joining what was perceived as North American network. But as far as I know, International Center for Academic Integrity, which is based in the US, but they aim to cover all continents, already have some activities in Africa, so I would recommend contacting International Center of Academic Integrity. But of course, in terms of particular projects, we are happy to collaborate also with partners from Africa. We are not only limited to Europe. The only thing is that our primary focus is on Europe.
But presumably universities in South Africa can access any of the free resources you have.
Of course, yeah.
Sure. And I think this might have to be our last question, but it's quite a meaty one. What's the best approach to help universities or institutions in creating an academic integrity policy?
Would you like me to answer that, Thomas?
Right. I can answer that in a couple of minutes.
But if I can just shortly say something, and then I
yes, of course. Yeah, you do. You take it.
Great paper written by Tracy Bretak from University of South Australia. She evaluated the academic integrity policies of several institutions and came up with the criteria what well-written academic policy should contain and how the message should be communicated. So I would definitely recommend to start with this paper, read it, and learn from it.
Yeah, we're just in the process of revising our policies within our institution. Because once you've actually set up policies, it doesn't stop there. You have to keep maintaining the policies because the threats change and the circumstances change. So you need to monitor your policies once you've got them set up. But we set our policies up way back in 2010. At the start of it just happened that the IFI project was just starting, and we decided to develop new policies in my institution. So I can remember the date quite well. And one of the reasons they were so successful at the time is that we were very inclusive about the way we developed them. So we made sure that people were different parts of the institution bought into the policies. But our policies are now not working very well, and we are starting to revise them. And so we're having a radical look at how we how we organise our policies and how they work. So it doesn't stop after you've got the policies. You really need to keep monitoring them and checking whether they work. We had a steering committee that met 3 times a year, and that meant that we were able to make fine adjustments to the policies as we went through, as we spotted things that weren't working well. But you really need to make sure you have a regular radical review of what the policies are, whether they're working, whether they're fit for purpose, and put amendments in place. But there are lots of, as Thomas said, there's lots and lots of literature on what makes good policies, and we can provide lots of information on that for you if you like. But if you want people to come in and talk to your institution, either as a webinar to your institution or to come in person, then we could certainly help with that if you're interested in that.
Thank you, Irene. And obviously the second part of that question was what do you do after the policy's been set up? So you've already spoken to that. I think we're up to time, everyone. So I'd like to thank Tomas and Irene for a very informative webinar, and I look forward to reading the full report once it's published in the spring. So thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who's attended.
And can I just thank Turnitin for hosting this conference, for the webinar, and for helping to make it work.
Yeah, I thank as well all participants and Turnitin for hosting the webinar. And yeah, wish you a nice day and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Thank you, everyone.